Today I'm going to tell you a story you've probably never heard before about Albert Einstein. It's about how he died. Along the way, we'll learn about the ingenious Hail Mary that his surgeons came up with to try to buy him a couple more years of life, using an everyday supply that you probably have in your kitchen. And we'll learn how, if Einstein had suffered his fate just a few years after it happened, doctors could have instead permanently fixed the problem and saved his life for the very, very long term. So, how did Einstein die? Keep watching. Einstein died in 1955, but the story behind his death actually began about 6 years earlier, during a planned, scheduled surgery. You see, for months, Albert Einstein had been suffering from abdominal pain, and no one could really figure out what was going on. Because his doctors couldn't figure out the cause, they ultimately underwent what was basically an exploratory surgery to diagnose and hopefully treat the source of the pain. His surgeon, Dr. Rudolf Nissen, was anticipating to find what they were calling intestinal cysts. But instead, during Einstein's surgery, Dr. Nissen found something much more ominous. He found an aneurysm of the abdominal aorta. And what this surgeon did next would ultimately seal Einstein's fate. Quick interjection. I realized after I filmed that I never really explained what aneurysms are in the first place. And in order to understand why they matter, we have to understand how they work. So I've got some Play-Doh here, and we're gonna use Play-Doh to illustrate aneurysms and understand why we should even care. Okay, so back to our conversation. An aneurysm is when the wall of a blood vessel, in this case an artery, starts to get weak. As that wall of the blood vessel becomes weaker, it can start to bulge out from the blood flowing by. Literally, the blood pressure itself starts to push on that section of the wall. The problem is, the bigger the bulge gets, the thinner that part of the wall of the vessel becomes. And that means as it gets thinner, there's a risk of it rupturing. As you can imagine, if a blood vessel like the aorta were to get a hole in it, or even rupture, literally gallons of blood per minute could start spilling out. And that would be very, very bad. Doctors in Einstein's time already knew what an aneurysm was. The problem is they didn't have a good way to fix them. They had tried literally everything. Surgeons had tried using silver wires to stimulate a clot. They tried using suture to try to shape the aneurysm itself. They even tried using a band to try to tie off a piece of that aneurysm. The problem was nothing worked. And ultimately, all of these patients died. But during Einstein's fateful surgery, his surgeon decided to try something new, using something that you probably have in your kitchen today. It's using this stuff, cellophane wrap. You see, surgeons knew that cellophane caused an inflammatory reaction and irritation within the body. So they thought maybe you could wrap that around an aneurysm, like Einstein's, to intentionally create this hard scar, to basically scar that aneurysm into place and prevent it from getting bigger. That's exactly what Dr. Nissen did when he was operating on Dr. Einstein. He wrapped literally cellophane around Einstein's aortic aneurysm. Today, surgeons actually use an endovascular stent. That's like a literal type of lattice being put inside the artery to fix these. Or occasionally they'll use a hand-sewn graft, which is a section of tubing that essentially replaces that part of the blood vessel. But in that moment for Albert Einstein, cellophane wrap was unfortunately as cutting edge as things got. So, did it work? Well, it did, to a degree. Albert Einstein not only survived the surgery, but went on to live another 7 years. Unfortunately, his aneurysm finally caught up with him, and on April 17th, 1955, Albert Einstein checked into Princeton Hospital with crippling abdominal pain, and soon he was diagnosed with a rupture of his aortic aneurysm. That cellophane wrap, which had kept things from rupturing all these years, was probably also the reason why his aneurysm was now leaking slowly, rather than a torrential amount of bleeding. Einstein's doctors recommend that he undergo emergency surgery, especially because by now some of those newer technologies that we talked about had been developed. But Einstein had other ideas, and he refused. In his final recorded words, Albert Einstein told those around him, "I want to go when I want. It is tasteless to prolong life artificially. I have done my share. It is time to go. I will do it elegantly." Albert Einstein passed away the next morning at the age of 76. Now, unfortunately, Einstein's death wasn't even the end of his medical adventures, and his brain was literally stolen from his body after he died. If you'd like to hear the story about how that happened, in the next week or so, there should be a video either here or here on the screen, and a button that you can click to watch the story. See you guys soon.